Greetings to all at DEF Expo joining me through cyberspace for a short discourse on some factors which could impact warfare out there in the deep ocean. Any discussion on the future of warfare at sea requires a brief recap of the unique aspects of the maritime dimension. Unlike space and cyberspace, the seas have been a tangible medium for humanity ever since the dawn of man and has been used for many activities, such as for trade, for obtaining vital supplies, for military purposes, for seaborne invasions, for deterrence, and not least for resources such as food, energy, and minerals. For these many reasons, the maritime domain has been and always will be vital for the prosperity and security of all nations and for their ability to influence or even dominate others. Thus, though the seas have always been a global commons, they have also always been a contested commons. Moreover, this contestation is as prevalent in peacetime as in war, and between both state and non-state actors. Though parts of the maritime domain, such as territorial waters and exclusive economic zones, are now restrictive to some extent, the freedom of the high seas and freedom of navigation thereon are enshrined both in international law and in age-old custom. There are no property rights at sea, and the ocean does not belong to any country, any organization, or any company. In the absence of rights, it is but natural that the seas are susceptible to competition, confrontation, and conflict, and this is unlikely to change in the foreseeable future. In fact, all indicators point to increased global maritime tension in the unfolding geopolitical order. The potential for maritime cooperation is regrettably always eclipsed by the struggle for military and trade advantage and for access to resources, energy, and markets. Military conflict between belligerent nations immediately leads to instability at sea and impacts the ongoing trade of even those not party to the conflict by raising shipping costs on account of uneconomic routing and increased insurance outlays. Commercial shipping and even neutral warships become vulnerable to possible collateral damage. It is therefore in the interest of all nations to strive for a stable oceanic environment and general maritime security. This is likely to be an elusive goal. When interstate conflict does break out, naval forces can and do play a disproportionate role in the outcome by, inter alia, attacking trade, disrupting supply lines, blockading ports, destroying offshore infrastructure, and striking coastal and inland targets. For that reason, history records that great powers have, first, always been naval powers, and we see this continuing through the aspirations of economically strong powers today to acquire and maintain large navies. Over the past 100 years or so, the maritime domain has been transformed by two distinct developments. First, the replacement of customary and traditional international law by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which came into force less than 3 decades ago in 1994, and which grants coastal states legal rights to various maritime zones adjacent to their coastline. It lays down a comprehensive regime for governing maritime activities. However, this territorialization of the seas by UNCLOS has given rise to many disputes, differences, interpretations, and transgressions, most visibly in the South China Sea. The United Nations and the International Maritime Organization have the authority but not the means to enforce the convention. While another round of conferences on UNCLOS is clearly necessary to resolve issues through unanimous acceptance and ratification, the convention could itself become a bone of discord. Secondly, and most tellingly, the humongous impact of exponentially accelerating technology has completely revolutionized the maritime battle space and warfare at sea, as well marine transportation and communications. Since the advent of the 20th century, starting with radio and then through radar and satellites, the maritime environment has become increasingly transparent, and it has become easier and easier to detect, identify, and track ships, submarines, and aircraft operating at sea. Furthermore, weapons and munitions have vastly increased in range, speed, and accuracy, and seagoing platforms are now more accessible to kinetic action from surface, underwater, and airborne dimensions, and even from land-based weapon systems. Though the vulnerability of platforms has increased, so has their ability to defend themselves through a variety of hard weaponry and soft countermeasures, including stealth, tactics, and damage control. Every technical advancement, we must remember, in offense brings about a response in defense. In fact, naval platforms are today far more potent and survivable than they ever were. The same, however, cannot be said of commercial shipping and merchant ships, and trade will therefore certainly pay a heavy price in any major future maritime conflict. The immediate and near future of warfare at sea will doubtless be shaped more by multiple technological advancements than by any treaties and conventions. So let me underscore 6 developments likely to be the most impactful. Firstly, the increasing overlay of the entire maritime battle space by the space and cyber mediums, which are being increasingly militarized. The resultant surveillance, communication, disruption, and deception capabilities will impact all aspects of the detection, identification, targeting, and destruction cycle. Consequently, and secondly, all major and even most emerging powers would have considerable maritime domain awareness in real time, including in the underwater domain. And this will continue to erode the traditional freedom of maneuver enjoyed by naval forces by making their presence and their movements more transparent to adversaries and neutrals alike. Thirdly, and most consequentially, is the development of autonomous weaponized platforms powered by AI, such as the next generation of UCAVs, USVs, and UUVs. These would operate on, above, and below the surface of the sea and assess, engage, and attempt to destroy adversaries without human intervention. This would be a massive game changer, as it would do away with the need for remote control of unmanned or uncrewed assets, as is required presently, with all the communication and meteorological vulnerabilities inherent in remote control. Fourthly, would be the return of mass or quantity to warfare. Contemporary, fully loaded naval ships, submarines, and aircraft are enormously expensive and are manned by equally expensive, highly trained manpower, resulting in their being unaffordable in large numbers. Force levels are therefore today very limited relative to the operational tasks, even for superpower navies. The reduction in quantity or mass at the expense of quality has considerable negative consequences for naval commanders and also poses the ever-present fear of catastrophic loss despite formidable defenses. Autonomous uncrewed platforms are likely to be far cheaper and could be inducted literally in hundreds, which would enable them being deployed in swarms and overwhelming the defender. Fifthly, long-range precision weapons at hypersonic speeds will enable strikes deep inland from the sea, making almost every urban center on land targetable from the sea at short notice by platforms operating in no man's land, as it were. Combined with real-time surveillance and awareness, this will also allow instant, almost real-time targeting of ships at sea. Last but not least could be a game changer for the defender. Directed energy weapons which could use high power lasers to destroy targets at near instantaneous speed of light. Let me conclude with some thoughts on the future of conflicts in general. Since international institutions such as the United Nations have neither the requisite authority nor the enforcement capability to maintain global security, the occurrence of military conflict will depend on the propensity of all nations to abide by the sanctity of borders and respect for sovereignty, which are fundamental two pillars of the Westphalian system of nation states, which the world has adopted ever since the 17th century. Clearly, there is a need to reform both the UN and its Security Council on one hand, and arrive at a convention which governs the imposition of automatic penalties, including economic sanction, on states which do not adhere to the accepted rules of international law. This is easier said than done, and until humanity evolves more sophisticated methodologies of global governance which would be able to restrain aggression even by great powers, the best mechanism available is by achieving a balance of power which deters the use of force. Due to the nature of the medium, it is impossible to create barriers between military and civilian domains at sea. On the contrary, each other's commercial shipping and other civilian assets are fair targets for belligerents locked in combat at sea. Further, the presence of neutrals in the undefined and undemarcated battle space will often result in collateral damage to civilian assets, including vessels engaged in fishing and scientific research. Business and governments are now also both interested in developing dual-use technology, and common supply chains are already a reality. This will certainly advance research and bring down costs, but may only add to global militarization. In conclusion, it is quite clear that peace can be maintained through four concurrent objectives: achieving global and regional balance of power, which will allow deterrence through mutually assured destruction. Secondly, mutual economic interdependence to the degree possible. Thirdly, coalitions of the willing, which may take on the job of enforcement to some degree. And lastly, strongly supported, implemented, and enforced international law on the parts of all nations. Thank you.